Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will learn about Node.js. This lesson has three main parts to it. Number one, we will answer the question, what is Node.js? Number two, I will help you install Node on your computer. And number three, we will have a hands-on demo. You and I will get to see Node in action. We will write a bit of code together, step by step. Should be a lot of fun. So let's start at the top. Number one, what is Node? To answer that, let's talk about JavaScript first and then circle back to Node. So what is JavaScript? We traditionally think of JavaScript as a language that only runs within the web browser, which means JavaScript can only do web browser-ish things. Things like opening a modal window or a lightbox on a web page, or opening or closing a toggle menu on a page, or adding new content to a page without a hard refresh. Those are all very web browser-ish tasks. We might call them front-end tasks. But what about less browser-ish tasks and more computer-ish or server-ish tasks? Things we might call back-end. Things like creating new folders and files on a computer or server's hard drive. Things like interacting directly with a database, or triggering a server to send an email. Traditionally, to do any of those things, you would need to use a language like PHP, or Ruby, or Python. You would need a language that can run on a computer and not just run within a web browser, which means JavaScript can't do any of these things. Until one day, Node.js came along and said, "Hey JavaScript, yeah? Do you want to grow up and wear your big boy pants?" Yes, I'd like that. Great, because you are a legitimate programming language just like any other. There's no reason you need to be limited to the browser. Do you agree? I agree. Cool. My name's Node. I just took the JavaScript guts out of Google Chrome, and I used those guts to build a new playground for you that is located on the computer or server itself and not in a web browser. Within this new playground, you can do whatever you want. You will have access to the file system. You can create files, delete files. You can talk directly to databases. You can send emails. You can create and serve up your own API. You can do whatever you want. Sweet. Thank you, Node. So that's what Node.js is. It is a JavaScript runtime that lets us do just about anything with JavaScript. Now, you can do a lot of different things with Node, but I would say most things fall into one of two camps. The first camp is when you install Node on a server. In this case, when the users of your website or app request a bit of data, Node is what's actually taking that incoming request and then maybe hitting up a database or hitting up an API somewhere, retrieving the data, and then sending it back to the user. So in this case, Node is what is actually powering and serving up your public-facing website or app. The second camp, or the other super popular usage of Node, is to install it on your own personal computer. In this case, we are not using Node to serve up anything. Instead, we are just using Node as a development tool. We are using it to basically create our own little robot assistant. We are using Node to automate all sorts of web development tasks that can save us a ton of time. And in this course, that is the way that we will leverage Node. All right, so now we know what Node is. We know why we want to use it. Now we can go ahead and install it on our computers. So let's get started. Search for the website nodejs.org. You should see a few download links. We are interested in the one that ends with LTS. We don't necessarily want the newest and most cutting edge version of Node. We want the most stable version of Node. So go ahead and click that, begin the download. And once the download finishes, whether you are on Windows or Mac, just go ahead and double click the downloaded file. The installation process is self-explanatory. You can just click next, next, next through the installer. All of the default options are A-OK. Once the installer completes, let's make sure that everything was set up correctly. To do that, I want you to open up your command line. Type in the following command, node space, and then -v. Hit enter. Now your numbers may not match what you see here exactly, but as long as you see V and then a few numbers, everything's great. You're in business. If instead your command line replies with unknown command or command not found, don't panic. That just means we might need to troubleshoot your Node installation a bit. If that's the case for you, go ahead and pause this video and check out the text description for this lesson. I've included a few common pitfalls and solutions. All right, I will assume that anyone moving past this point in the lesson has Node successfully installed. So at this point, we can now move on to the exciting part of the lesson, the third part, where we get to see Node in action, and we write a bit of code together. So the first thing I want you to do is to navigate to the generic sites or projects folder that you created a few lessons ago. And within that folder, create a new folder and name it Node Experiment or something similar. It doesn't have to be exactly this name. But once you create a new folder, I want you to navigate to the new folder in your command line. So I'm just going to type cd space, and then I'm going to drag that new folder on top of the command line and hit enter. Next, we want to create a new empty JavaScript file where we can write a bit of code and then have Node run that file. So you can use your favorite text editor to create a new JavaScript file in the new folder, or since we have already navigated to that folder in the command line, you could just type touch and then the name of the file. So let's create a new file named test.js. There it is. So now go ahead and open up this new empty file in your favorite text editor. And let's begin with a simple hello world example. So type console.log, parentheses, quotes, hello world. Add a semicolon. Go ahead and save the file. Okay, now we want to run this file through Node. We want Node to run the file. So in our command line, type node space, and then if you were truly lazy, you could drag this file on top of your command line. But since we know we are already in the right directory, you can literally just type test.js. So this will force Node to run that file that we just created. And there we go. So the console replies with hello world. Let's try something a little bit more exciting. So clear out your text file, and let's try instead console.log, parentheses, 2 + 2. Riveting, right? So go ahead and add a semicolon, hit save. Back in the command line, just run the exact same command, node test.js. You might be wondering why seeing the number 4 here is supposed to be exciting. Here's why. It's because it means that whatever we write in this file isn't merely getting repeated or echoed out to the command line. But instead, it means that Node is actually interpreting and evaluating our JavaScript code, right? So Node actually ran the expression 2 + 2, and it concluded that that equaled 4. So that's a nerdy way of saying that we can do whatever we want in this file. So let's try something a bit more exciting. Let's write a bit of code to programmatically have Node create a new HTML file in this folder for us. Out of the box, Node comes with a bunch of modules that can do things for us. So since we want to create a file, we want to leverage the Node module named fs, which stands for file system. So let's create a variable, and we could name it whatever we want. I will call it fs just to make sense, but you could name it unicorn or pizza. The name of the variable does not matter. Let's just say fs though. And then we set it to equal, and then we can say require, and then this is where the name does matter. So in quotes, I will say fs, and this is the name of a Node module or package. Okay, so a semicolon here, and now on a new line, we can access all of the tools and methods that live within this file system package by just saying fs. This is now referencing our variable name that we created. So fs dot, and then it contains a method named writeFile. And we want to give this writeFile method 3 things. So just as placeholders, we could say a, comma, B, comma, C. Right, so we want to give this method 3 arguments. Now back to the task at hand, remember we want to create an HTML file within our folder. Now the first argument is the location on your computer where you want to create the new file. So instead of A, let's say underscore underscore dir name, which stands for directory name. This will tell Node to look within the current folder. And then right after dir name, we can add on, and then quotes, and then within the quotes, let's say /, and then the name of the file that we want to create. So maybe index.html. Okay, so this is the first argument. The second argument is what you want to live within the file. So instead of this placeholder B, I will provide a string of text, so quotes, and then let's imagine we want to create an HTML headline. So heading level 1, close out the tag, and within the tags, let's just say HTML is great. Okay, and then finally, for the third argument, instead of this placeholder C, we want to include a function that will run once our write file action has either succeeded or failed. This is commonly referred to as a callback function. So at the end where our placeholder C was, let's say function, and it gets its own set of parentheses, and then right after those, curly brackets. Within the curly brackets, let's drop down, and let's write an if statement. So if parentheses, curly brackets. Let's say if there is an error, so if something goes wrong and for some reason our file cannot be created, if that's the case, then within these curly brackets, we can say return console.log parentheses error. So if there's a problem, this way we can see the problem in the command line. And then right after the closing curly bracket for our if statement, we can say else. Otherwise, if there's not a problem, within these curly brackets, we can just say return console.log and then quotes for a string of text, and let's say congrats, meaning everything worked perfectly and your file was created. And finally, before we save this file, if we are going to be referencing a potential error that occurred, we want to be sure to include that as a parameter when we first say function. So within these parentheses, let's include error as a parameter. And now let's save this file and test it out. So over in the command line, node test.js, congrats. And if I check my folder, sitting alongside our test.js, we now see index.html. And if I open it up in my text editor, cool, we can see that it contains our content. Now let's change gears and try one more Node example before we bring this lesson to a close. So up next, let's make it our goal to use Node to programmatically download and save an image from the internet. So for example, we need a URL for an image that lives on the internet. So if you want to follow along with me, you can visit github.com/learnwebcode/welcome-to-git. And I'm just going to dig within this images folder and then click on dog.jpg. And this URL will not work because this is still a web page, but if you right click on the dog photograph and choose view image, this is the type of URL I'm looking for. Now you do not need to use this exact photo of dog. Any image URL on the internet will work just fine. So go ahead and copy an image URL into your clipboard. And let's say that our goal is to use Node to programmatically save this file to live within our folder. So back in our code, back in our test.js file, in order to send out a request onto the internet, I'm going to want to include another Node module or package. So up towards the top, let's create a new variable. We could name it whatever we want, but just to make sense, I will name it HTTPS and set it to equal, and then I want to require in or include in parentheses quotes, a Node module named HTTPS. And just a quick note on semicolons in JavaScript. 99% of the time they are not necessary, but a lot of developers consider it just a best practice to be consistent and include them at the end of a statement. It's a bit of a personal preference because some developers hardly ever use semicolons. But if you're going to use them, you should probably be consistent, so you'll notice that on this line I forgot to include one at the end. Nothing breaks without it, it's just something you'll want to be consistent with. And technically you could include one at the end of this line as well. Okay, back to the task at hand. We want to leverage this HTTPS module to download and save this dog photo. So down at the bottom of our code, down at the very bottom, let's add a new line. And let's say HTTPS to leverage that new module, and look inside it with a dot, and it contains a tool or method named get. We want to give this method two things. So within the parentheses, as a placeholder, we could say A and B, right? Two arguments. The first argument is the URL that you want to work with. So technically, we could include quotes here and then paste in our clipboard. But our URL is so long that it would take up almost the entire screen. So instead, why don't we do this? Right before this line, we could create a variable. The name doesn't matter, but I'm going to name it my photo location and set that to equal and then quotes, and now paste in your clipboard. Cool. So you can see that that path is really long. And just to keep this line of code clean, now instead of the placeholder A, we can just say my photo location, right? That variable will pull in the photo URL. And then the second argument for this get method, instead of the placeholder B, we want to include a function where we say what we want to actually do with the photo data. So let's say function, parentheses, curly brackets. Within those brackets, let's drop down. And this get method is going to pass along any data that lives at our URL into our function. So within our parentheses, let's add a parameter. We could name it anything, but why don't we call it response? And now on this line, within the body of our function, we can do whatever we want with that data. So let's say response, and then we want to pipe it or send it somewhere. So dot pipe. And what do we want to do with it? Well, we just want to save it onto our computer within this same folder. So within these parentheses, let's say fs to use the file system, and then a dot to look inside it. And let's use a method named create write stream. It gets its own set of parentheses. And within the parentheses, we just want to provide a path to where we want to create the file. So I will say underscore underscore dir name to point at the current folder, and then add on a string of text and say /, and then you can name the file whatever you want to name it. So I will just name it mydog.jpg. Cool. Okay, so now we can go ahead and save this file. And back in our command line, let's run node test.js, push enter. And if we go and check our folder, cool, there is our my dog photo. And if you open it up, perfect. And that marks the end of this hands-on Node demo. We didn't do anything earth-shattering with Node, but hopefully you can see the potential. If Node can access our file system, and if Node can go onto the internet and grab files for us, that means we can automate all sorts of things. And the good news is that we don't need to write a bunch of code to create that automation. We wrote code in this lesson just because I wanted you to see how Node works at its most basic level. But writing code for very basic tasks like we did here is not an efficient use of our time on Earth. Instead, we can leverage code that other super intelligent people have already written and have already shared with the world. Which brings us to the topic of our next lesson. This is exactly where NPM comes into play. And in our next lesson, we will learn what NPM is and how to get started using it. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I will see you in the next lesson.